Well, it's a week after Halloween, but there's one more spooky topic I'd like to talk about. Practice with sharp swords. So this is one where I'm late to the party. People made videos about this back in 2017, I think, inspired by videos on the Holmgang Hamburg channel where people actually I can't say it, S-P-A-R with sharp blades. You'll see why I have trouble with that word in a moment. And people asked me about them in the past. Just today, there was another new comment about this topic. And I figured, you know what, I might as well finally talk about it. Normally, I like to stay away from drama and whatever, but I think this is useful to talk about. I don't know if they do it anymore, if they're all dead or crippled or... Anyway, so when seeing stuff like that, it's easy to just think, oh, great. They're just doing this to bolster their own ego, to feel all macho and whatever. And by the way, recklessness is not a sign of masculinity. Recklessness is a sign of immaturity, just to point that out. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're doing it for more sensible reasons. There are benefits from practicing with sharp blades. Don't do it, by the way. If you're watching this and you don't have a lot of experience, if you're not a HEMA instructor, etc., do not ever practice with sharp blades, okay? Just to get that out of the way. However, there are some benefits, namely, sharp blades behave differently than blunt ones. In the bind, when two swords meet, if they are blunt, you can do this all day. You can slide the edges against one another and it makes pretty sounds. With synthetics, it's even more obvious. Trying to do binding and winding plays with these is like trying to stop yourself on a skateboard at full speed by dragging a greasy garlic finger across a wall. Now, sharp blades, on the other hand, it's a different story. They stick. I can't just drag the blades. I mean, with light pressure I can. With light pressure I can drag them all I want, but if I actually press, then they're not going anywhere. Which is why if you want to thrust from bind, for example, you either wind your edge against their flat or your flat against their edge. The problem is these guys don't seem to know what binding and winding is. It's not happening in any of the videos I saw, which is very ironic because here's another issue. So safety, of course, goes out the window if you do stuff like what they do. You know, even with the exposed arms in particular, you don't even have the protection from sturdy clothing, which they would have had back in the day in a duel. There's some level of protection that clothing offers, especially back then, you know, in the 15th, 16th century, they had some pretty sturdy clothing. So it can be effective against light contact, against slicing cuts to an extent, whereas bare skin is a lot easier to cut. So the other potential benefit you might get out of this is the added sense of danger. So if you know that this can seriously injure you if you don't defend yourself, you should defend yourself better, right? And this is one of the issues in HEMA practice. You know, people just often kind of rush in, especially in tournaments. If you get an afterblow, yeah, you may get points deducted, but depending on how they do it in the tournament, how the scoring system is, it might still be beneficial to land a cut or thrust and then receive an afterblow. In real life, that's no bueno. If you mortally wound your opponent and then you receive the same, nobody wins. Everybody loses. But, and that's a big one right here, they don't do that either. If you look at the videos, they're not really concerned with protecting themselves. They just go in, they just try to land a hit. This is where blade contact comes into play. And it's also something that I recently thought about in a different way, because until now I didn't practice a whole lot of binding and winding. When I was with the HEMA School Blood and Iron, that was just not the main focus. They might have changed it since then, and we did binding and winding plays as well, but the main focus was on cut, parry, counter, basically. And so now the instructor that I'm practicing with now has a different approach. He's all about work from the bind. The benefit of that is that it's safer for both, because if there's blade contact, you just get more information than just looking at what the opponent is doing. You feel it as well. For example, if you're in a bind with the opponent's blade and you feel no pressure, meaning they're soft or weak in the bind, you can just go ahead and thrust in the face, basically, making sure to cross the line so that you displace the sword and come in for a thrust of your own. If you do feel pressure, if they are strong or hard in the bind, then you can't do that. If there's pressure going in that direction, I thrust, it's just going to be displaced, and then I might receive a thrust in the face at the same time. So in that case, I might have to use a disengage, basically, and then I can either thrust. I can do it in various ways, control the blade, I can, dip under with a cut, things like that. So it gives you more information about what's going on. Also, you're behind your sword. So there's a certain level of protection there, because your opponent needs to get past your blade to be able to threaten you with a thrust or a cut. And the historical manuscripts are full of that. Once you get into a certain distance, the Krieg or war, that's a distance where you don't have to take a step to reach the opponent. You can just keep cutting. This becomes really dangerous if both just flail like crazy and just try to hit each other, because it's way faster. For example, if I'm over here, I cannot reach you, all right? And by the way, I've never cut my camera. For some reason, this is one of those very frequent questions. So from here, I would have to take a step forward to be able to reach, which of course you can see. So this takes longer. Whereas if I'm already here, boom, then this is all it takes. So I can quickly throw cuts from here, and it just becomes more dangerous. And the problem is that was what the guys at Holmgang Hamburg were doing. They would just come in and just cut right side, left side, right side, left side, things like that. And there is no attempt to control the opponent's blade. And also no thrusts, obviously. If you have a sword with a point, you cannot do this. It doesn't matter how macho you think you are, you can't be running each other through with pointed blades. And that's the other big issue here. If your main goal is keeping it as close to reality as possible, being worried about getting hit and all the implications of real combat with sharp blades, you're not doing it right. Simply, if you just take out thrusts completely, with some weapons that may be acceptable. Longswords, nah. Thrusts are an essential part of longsword fighting. And the other issue, and this is the reason why I grabbed the bronze blade here, is what kind of sharpness are we even talking about here? Because this right here is sharp in the sense that it has an edge, and I've used it for cutting. But it's not super sharp, okay? I can lightly drag it across my hand. I'm not gonna immediately cut myself wide open. If I did this properly, yeah, I would cut myself. And if you throw a cut like this, then yeah, you're gonna cut, but you're not gonna, sever an arm or cut halfway through it or cut into bone or through bone at least, things like that. Now this, on the other hand, there's no way to mess around with this and not get seriously hurt or worse. Even just this, okay? Just a quick little snipe to the hand would destroy it. It would sever tendons. It would cut through the small bones in the hand. It would be a disaster. Let alone a cut to the leg, which you see a lot in the videos. If you were to actually throw a committed cut with this to the leg, it's gone, just straight up. Even just a slice with this would be quite dangerous. Now, I will say there is one valuable thing about all of this. which is it shows that light cuts, even to the arms, are not necessarily a fight stopper. There was one case where one of the guys got cut in the forearm. I'm not going to show you that in detail because otherwise YouTube's going to flag it as whatever, violent, offensive, etc. But you can see in the video that the cut was deep enough to gape open, and he didn't notice. The other guy had to point out, hey, you got a cut on your arm. He didn't even realize. So that did not stop him. He could still continue fighting. So this is one of the fundamental challenges of calling hits and scoring and whatnot, because sometimes, yeah, it can be difficult to say, was this enough? Either way, any kind of cut that you receive in historical combat would be bad, obviously. You know, death by 1,000 cuts, all of that. Every injury you receive would hinder your ability to fight. And by the way, there is a productive way of doing this. I'll put a link to a video down below of actual practice with sharp blades, but it was done very differently. For one, with protective gear, and two, with the points removed. So that way it is still safe to use thrusts. If you do it in a controlled manner, it is safe if you have enough experience. Again, please don't do this yourself. What I saw in those Holmgang Hamburg videos is just doing it wrong in more ways than one. It's not just a safety issue, it's also an issue of what the hell are you doing, because it's clearly not based on historical techniques. None of it. The stances are off, the ways they perform cuts, the lack of thrusts, again, whatever it is, it's not historical combat. Or, and this is an important point, it's not skilled historical combat. Because yes, you do have to keep in mind that not everybody was a master back then, obviously. There were people who carried swords who were not terribly proficient with them, or who didn't receive formal training and just kind of figured things out by themselves. And so here's where the value of the formal training comes in. Because if you have two people, assuming they're of equal physical fitness, and one just is self-taught and has some hands-on experience, and the other actually knows the actual techniques, there's no way the amateur is going to have much of a chance. For example, in the bind, if you haven't practiced it, you don't know what to do. If you suddenly end up in a bind and your opponent starts to wind and thrust for you, like, what? And that's it. And there are ways to control the fight through subtle framing that an untrained opponent may simply not realize. For example, again, Zayan, the HEMA instructor that I currently practice with, has a way of positioning himself in such a way that one angle of attack is basically closed off. His point is crossing the line and is threatening me. He can easily perform what is called an absetzen, or setting off, where you catch the opponent's cut on your blade while thrusting at the same time. So you're defending while threatening them. So you can't just rush in and cut to that side because that gets me killed. Your own protection needs to come first. And there are issues with just going in for a bunch of committed cuts. Now, I'm all for strong committed cuts that can, sever limbs and just end the fight right there. But I definitely notice against this sort of defensive blade contact oriented fighting style is very dangerous. Also because of how exposed the hands and arms are. Even if I make sure to keep everything tucked in and lead with the blade, it still puts my hands forward where they can be countercut. Because one of the safest ways to defend and counter is to simply step back so that you're out of your opponent's measure and cut to the arms or hands at the same time, because then the hands and arms are within reach, but the body is not. So you're not in danger in that way. Which leads me to another point about how long sword fights can last, but I should cover that in a separate video because it's getting too long. So in short, there are certain benefits from practicing with sharp blades, but there are obviously also serious risks. And depending on how you do it, you may not really get the benefits you're looking for. Because here's the thing, if you want to make it more dangerous in the sense that you discourage reckless charges and just opening yourself up for counters. There's a way to do that safely with blunt swords, with protective gear. Hit them harder, basically. If you agree to strike each other harder to discourage opening yourselves up, that's a way to do it. If it hurts, you're not as likely to just charge in blindly, which of course is still dangerous, especially you can't really hit each other hard on the head because that can cause cumulative brain damage over time. And of course there's also a risk for other injuries even with blunt swords. The risks and benefits have to be weighed accordingly, and you have to keep in mind that whatever we do, however much we try to hone our practice, it's never going to be exactly the same. It's always going to be an approximation. And we can't claim with 100% certainty that we understand exactly how a technique is meant to be used. There's also the fact that fighting unarmored without any protective gear, not even helmets or fencing masks or gloves, is different than sparring with gear. And of course, trying to kill or wound the opponent for real while preventing them from doing the same to you is just always going to be different from sparring. You can just approximate it and do it as well as possible. This is not the way. It honestly isn't. That's all I've got for now. Hope you found it interesting. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks. Be safe, be smart. Thanks for watching. Thanks for retching. You might as well retch at some of the stuff that's going on there.